When the world tells you that you don't deserve to exist, what do? You either break or you climb. In the winter of 1885, a woman's society had already buried alive stepped off a train into the frozen hell of Wyoming territory. Martha Calloway carried no bags, no money, no future, just the weight of 1,000 cruel whispers and one impossible choice. Marry a monster or freeze in the streets. They said Ethan Crow was cursed, dangerous, poor as dirt and twice as cold. They were wrong about everything. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The train's whistle split the frozen air like a scream. Martha Calloway stood on the platform of Coldwater Station, Wyoming territory, watching her last connection to civilization disappear into the white distance. Steam from the departing locomotive hung in the air like the ghost of every burned bridge she'd left behind. The temperature sat somewhere below mercy, and the wind cut through her wool coat as if the fabric were made of wishes. She was alone. Completely, terrifyingly alone. Around her, the platform emptied with practiced efficiency. Families reunited with shouts of joy. Businessmen hurried toward waiting carriages. A young bride in pristine white fell into the arms of a well-dressed rancher, their laughter crystallizing in the bitter air. Everyone had somewhere to go. Someone waiting. Everyone but Martha. She pulled her coat tighter, though it did nothing against the cold that had already settled into her bones during the 3-day journey from Philadelphia. Her fingers, swollen from the altitude and the chill, struggled with the buttons. Even this simple act, closing a coat, felt like an accusation. Everything was harder in this body. Everything had always been harder. Miss Calloway. The voice came from behind her, rough, uncertain, male. Martha turned slowly, bracing herself for the inevitable moment of disappointment. It always came. The flicker in their eyes when they saw her, the subtle shift in posture, the recognition that what stood before them didn't match whatever delicate fiction they'd constructed in their minds. The man who'd spoken stood near the station house, half hidden in shadow. He was tall. That much was clear even from a distance, but the failing afternoon light made it hard to see more. He didn't approach. Didn't move at all, really, just stood there like a stone pillar, waiting. Yes, Martha said, hating how small her voice sounded. I'm Martha Calloway. The man stepped forward, and the full weight of Coldwater's judgment stepped with him. He was not what she expected. Not a monster, not obviously cruel, just different. His clothes were worn to the point of character, leather and fur that had seen hard use and harder weather. His face was weathered, carved by wind and time into something stark and unreadable. Dark hair hung past his collar, shot through with premature gray. But it was his eyes that caught her, pale blue, almost colorless in the fading light, and utterly, completely serious. He looked at her for a long moment. Martha steeled herself for the reaction, the widening eyes, the barely concealed disgust, the polite excuse that would leave her stranded in this frozen nowhere. It didn't come. I'm Ethan Crow, he said simply. We should go. Storm's coming. No judgment, no commentary. No reaction at all to the fact that she was twice the size of the delicate creature he'd probably expected from her letters. Letters she'd paid a friend to write, carefully avoiding any mention of her appearance because what was the point? The truth only ever got doors slammed faster. Martha blinked. That's it? Your trunk on the platform? Ethan interrupted, nodding toward her single piece of luggage. Yes, but he was already moving, crossing the platform in long, efficient strides. He lifted her trunk, the one she'd struggled to drag from the train, as if it weighed nothing and turned back toward her. Horses this way. Can you ride? No, I've never... You'll learn. He started walking, not waiting to see if she followed. Martha stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what was happening. This was wrong. All wrong. In her experience, men like Ethan Crow, poor men, desperate men who placed advertisements for mail-order brides, they were always eager, overly friendly, quick with false compliments and quicker with wandering hands once the deal was sealed. But Ethan was none of those things. He was distant, professional, like he was picking up a piece of furniture, not a wife. Somehow, that was worse. Mr. Crow, she called after him, hurrying to follow. Her boots slipped on the ice-slicked platform, and she windmilled her arms to keep balance. Mr. Crow, wait! He stopped, turning back with that same unreadable expression. Storm's coming, he repeated. We need to move. I understand that, but we haven't even... We should talk, discuss arrangements. There are things we need to talk... Not here. His eyes flicked past her shoulder, and Martha turned to follow his gaze. Half the town was watching. They lined the windows of the general store, the saloon, the boarding house. Faces pressed against glass, eyes bright with curiosity and something crueler. A group of women stood outside the milliner's shop, their conversation dying as they stared. One of them, blonde, beautiful, wrapped in expensive furs, whispered something to her companions, and they all laughed. Martha's face burned despite the cold. She knew that laugh, had heard it in 1,000 different voices across 1,000 different rooms. It was the laugh that said, "Look at her. Look at what she thinks she deserves." "Miss Calloway." Ethan's voice pulled her back. He'd moved closer, his body now positioned between her and the watching crowd. "Please, we should go." There was something in his tone, not quite gentleness, but not cruelty either, just urgency. As if he understood exactly what she was feeling and wanted to spare her more of it. Martha nodded, not trusting her voice. The horse was a massive draft animal, brown with white feet, standing patient in the bitter cold. Beside it was a simple travois, 2 long poles lashed together with crossbeams, designed to be dragged behind the horse. Her trunk was already secured to it. "Her name's Goliath," Ethan said, running a hand along the horse's neck. "She's steady. Won't spook." That's a female horse?" Seemed fitting. Was that a joke? Martha searched his face but found no trace of humor, just that same serious, distant expression. Ethan moved to Goliath's side and laced his fingers together, creating a step. "Left foot here. Swing your right leg over, I'll help." Martha stared at the horse, at the distance between the ground and the saddle, at the impossibility of what he was asking. "I can't," she said quietly. "I'm too..." "Heavy?" Ethan finished. "Goliath pulls timber down the mountain. You're not too heavy." "That's not what I..." "Left foot," he repeated, still holding his hand steady. "Trust the horse." Martha looked into those pale blue eyes, searching for mockery, for the trap she knew had to be there. But she found only patience. Waiting. She took a breath and placed her left foot in his hands. The boost was smooth, practiced, and before she could process what was happening, she was in the saddle, looking down at the world from a height she'd never experienced. The ground seemed impossibly far away. Ethan swung up behind her in one fluid motion, settling into the saddle with the ease of someone who'd spent more of his life on horseback than off. His arms came around her to grip the reins, and Martha went rigid. "Relax," he said near her ear. "You'll spook the horse." "We're not married yet. This isn't proper." 40 miles to my place." "You want to walk?" 40 miles? Martha's voice rose. "You live 40 miles from town?" "Closer to 50, depending on the route. Storm's going to slow us." He clicked his tongue, and Goliath started moving. "Hold on to the saddle horn. Don't lean." The horse's gait was smooth, but Martha gripped the horn with white knuckles anyway, acutely aware of Ethan's presence behind her. He sat easy in the saddle, his body moving with the horse's rhythm, his arms steady on either side of her. She could feel the heat of him even through her coat, the solidity of muscle and bone. She'd never been this close to a man before, never been touched by one except in cruelty or clinical examination. The intimacy of it made her skin crawl with confusion. They rode through cold water in silence, Goliath's hooves crunching on the frozen street. The town was small, 24 buildings clustered around a single muddy road. Every window still held watching faces, every doorway framed judging eyes. "Why did you agree to this?" Martha asked suddenly, unable to bear the silence any longer. "You must have had other options, better options." Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Needed a wife." "Why?" "Winter's hard alone." "That's not a reason to marry someone." "Seems reason enough to me." They left the town behind, heading into open country that stretched toward distant mountains. The landscape was brutal in its beauty. endless white broken only by the dark scratch of bare trees and the jagged teeth of rock formations. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with the storm Ethan kept mentioning. "You'll freeze to death," Martha said, the words bursting out of her. "When you see what I really look like, when you understand what you've gotten yourself into, you'll turn back. You'll leave me somewhere, and I'll freeze to death." Ethan's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I see what you look like." "No, you don't. Not really. Not in all this clothing. Not until—" "I have eyes, Miss Calloway. I'm not blind." "Then why aren't you—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Why aren't you disgusted? Why aren't you disappointed? Why aren't you already planning how to get rid of me?" "Why aren't I what?" "Nothing. Never mind." They rode in silence for another mile before Ethan spoke again. "You afraid of me?" The question caught Martha off guard. "Should I be?" "Town says I am. They say I'm cursed, dangerous. Are you?" "Dangerous?" A pause. "Not to you. But to others? When necessary." It wasn't reassuring. It should have terrified her. But somehow, wrapped in his arms on a horse named Goliath, riding toward a future she couldn't imagine, Martha found herself almost calm. "The town doesn't like you," she observed. "Town doesn't like anyone who won't bend." "And you don't bend?" "No, ma'am. I don't." The first snowflakes began to fall as they rode, tiny and tentative at first, then larger, faster. Within 20 minutes, visibility had dropped to a few dozen yards. Ethan adjusted their course slightly, guiding Goliath with subtle pressure and quiet clicks. "How can you see where we're going?" Martha asked, squinting into the white blur. "Can't. Not really, but Goliath knows the way." "You trust a horse to navigate a blizzard?" "More than I trust my own eyes in this. Goliath's walked this trail 300 times. She knows every rock, every turn. She'll get us home." "And if she doesn't?" "Then we die together. Seems fair?" Martha didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the casual way he said it. "You're not very comforting, Mr. Crow." "Didn't promise comfort. Promise survival." "Is there a difference?" "Yes, ma'am. Survival's honest. Comfort's often a lie." The snow fell harder. The wind picked up, howling across the open ground like something alive and angry. Martha's face went numb despite the scarf she'd wrapped around it. Her fingers lost feeling even inside her gloves. The cold crept up from the stirrups, through her boots, into her bones. And still, Ethan sat steady behind her, a wall against the wind, his presence the only warm thing in a world turning white. "Tell me something," Martha said, desperate for distraction from the cold. "Why do they call you cursed?" "Because anyone who gets close to me ends up dead or gone." The bluntness of it stole her breath. That's not... It's true. Parents died when I was 12. Fever took my sister a year later. First wife died in childbirth along with the baby. Second wife disappeared. Just walked out one morning and never came back. Brother died in a mining accident. Partner in my first business venture shot himself. Should I keep going? I'm sorry. Don't be. Not your fault. But it's not yours either. These things, they happen. That's life. It doesn't make you cursed. Maybe. Maybe not. But it makes people stay away, and I've learned to prefer it that way. Then why marry me? Why bring someone close? Ethan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she almost missed it under the wind. Because I'm tired of talking to ghosts. Before Martha could respond, Goliath stumbled. The horse caught herself quickly, but the jolt sent Martha sliding sideways. Ethan's arm shot out, catching her around the waist and pulling her back against his chest. For a moment they stayed like that, her heart hammering, his arm a steel band holding her safe. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes, I think so." He released her slowly, making sure she was steady before returning his hand to the reins. "Ice under the snow, getting worse." "How much farther?" 20 miles, maybe. Hard to tell in this. 20 miles. In a blizzard. On a horse she didn't know how to ride. With a man who was practically a stranger, heading toward a home she'd never seen. Every rational part of Martha's brain screamed that this was insanity. That she should demand he turn back, return her to town, Let her take her chances with civilization. But what chances did she have? The truth was brutal and simple. No one wanted her. Not in Philadelphia, where her father's business had failed and his debts had swallowed everything, including her reputation. Not among the society women who'd once called themselves her friends, until poverty made her invisible. Not even among the desperate men who haunted the mail-order bride agencies, because even desperation had its limits. Ethan Crow was all she had. This frozen nightmare was all she had. So she gripped the saddle horn tighter and leaned back into the solid warmth of him, and she endured. The hours blurred together. The world became nothing but white and cold, and the steady rhythm of Goliath's gait. Martha's thoughts wandered, disconnecting from her frozen body. She thought about Philadelphia, about the townhouse that had been her childhood home, sold to pay her father's debts, about her mother's jewelry, her grandmother's china, her own hope chest, all of it gone, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the clothes on her back and a single trunk of necessities. She thought about the women at the agency, how they'd looked at her with pity and barely concealed disdain, how they'd tried to talk her out of this. Wyoming is uncivilized, they'd said. Dangerous. You're not suited for frontier life. What they meant was, you're too fat, too soft, too useless. You'll die out there. Maybe they were right. We're here. Ethan's voice pulled her back to the present. Martha blinked, trying to focus through the snow. She couldn't see anything that looked like here, just more white, more cold, more endless nothing. Then Goliath stepped around a massive boulder, and suddenly there was shelter. It wasn't much, a crude lean-to built against the rock face, barely large enough for the horse and the travois, but it cut the wind, and that was everything. Ethan dismounted in one smooth motion, then reached up to help Martha down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched ground. She would have fallen if he hadn't caught her, his hand strong on her waist. "Can't feel my legs," she managed through chattering teeth. "They're frozen. Need to move them. Can you walk?" I don't think... Try." He kept one arm around her waist, supporting most of her weight as he urged her forward. "Walk. Just a few steps. Need to get the blood moving." Martha stumbled forward, her legs screaming in protest as sensation began to return in pins and needles of agony. She wanted to stop, to sit down, to rest, but Ethan kept her moving, relentless and patient in equal measure. "That's it," he said. "Keep going. A few more steps." "I can't. You can. You are. Keep moving." They walked in circles inside the lean-to while Ethan tied off Goliath and secured the travois. By the time he finished, Martha could mostly support her own weight, though her legs still felt like they belonged to someone else. "Better?" he asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Now we climb." What?" Ethan pointed upward, and for the first time Martha noticed the narrow path carved into the rock face behind the lean-to. It disappeared into the falling snow about 20 feet up. "You live up there?" she asked, her voice rising toward hysteria. "Can't build in the valley. Floods every spring. High ground is safer." "But I can't climb that. I can barely walk." "Yes, you can. I'll help." "You don't understand. I can't. My body isn't made for this kind of thing." Ethan turned to face her fully, and for the first time since they'd met, something like emotion crossed his features. Not anger, not frustration, something gentler, but no less intense. "Listen to me, Miss Calloway. Your body got you through 3 days on a train, got you onto a horse you'd never ridden, got you through a blizzard that would have killed most people. Your body is made for exactly this kind of thing. It's kept you alive this long, hasn't it? That's not... It is. Your body's strong, stronger than you think. Now we're going to climb, and I'm going to be right behind you, and you're not going to fall. Understand?" Martha stared at him, this strange, serious man who somehow saw something in her that she'd never seen in herself. She wanted to argue, wanted to explain all the ways he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. "Understand?" he repeated. "Yes," she whispered. "Good. I'll carry your trunk up first, then come back for you. Wait here." He hoisted her trunk onto his shoulder, the trunk she couldn't even drag across a train platform, and started up the path. Within moments, the snow swallowed him completely. Martha stood alone in the lean-to, listening to Goliath's breathing and the howl of the wind. She was so cold she couldn't feel her face, so tired she could barely stand, so terrified she could taste bile in the back of her throat. But she'd meant what she said to Ethan. She would try. When he reappeared out of the white blur, he was carrying a length of rope. "I'm going to tie this around your waist," he explained. "If you slip, I've got you, but you won't slip." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you haven't given up yet. Most people would have by now, but you're still standing, still trying. That tells me everything I need to know." He secured the rope around her waist with practiced efficiency, then took position behind her at the base of the path. "Climb on your hands and knees if you need to. No shame in it. Just keep moving forward." The path was narrow, barely 2 feet wide in places, and slick with ice and snow. Martha went to her hands and knees immediately, not caring how it looked, only caring about not falling. She crawled upward, inch by terrible inch, her hands screaming where the ice cut through her gloves, her knees aching from the impact against frozen stone. Behind her, Ethan climbed with the rope in hand, his presence a constant reassurance. "That's good," he called out. "Keep that pace, don't look down." She looked down. The ground had disappeared into white nothing. They could have been 20 feet up or 200. There was no way to tell, no way to know how far she'd fall if the ice gave way. "Miss Calloway? Eyes forward. Focus on the next foot. Nothing else exists except the next foot of path." Martha dragged her attention back to the stone in front of her. The next foot. She could manage the next foot. She crawled forward. Her hand slipped. For one heart-stopping moment, she was sliding backward, scrabbling for purchase on the ice, the rope the only thing between her and a fall into white oblivion. Then Ethan was there, one hand on the rope, the other gripping her ankle, holding her steady. "I've got you," he said, calm as if they were discussing the weather. "Reset your hands. Find new grip." "I can't." "You can. Reset your hands." Martha's fingers felt like frozen clubs, but she forced them to move, to search for holds in the stone. She found a crack, wedged her fingers in, pulled herself forward. "Good. Now the other hand." She obeyed, moving mechanically, letting his voice guide her when her own courage failed. Inch by inch, they climbed higher. When the path finally leveled out onto a wider ledge, Martha collapsed onto her stomach, gasping for breath, her entire body shaking. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Ethan crouched beside her, not touching, just present. "You all right?" "No," Martha said honestly. "I'm really, really not all right." "But you made it." "I made it." "Think you can stand? We're almost there." Martha wanted to laugh at the absurdity of almost there when she felt like she'd already climbed a mountain. But she pushed herself to her knees, then her feet, swaying but upright. The ledge they stood on was perhaps 10 feet wide, carved into the mountainside by wind and time. At the far end, barely visible through the snow, was a dark opening in the rock. "That's home," Ethan said. It looked like a cave, a literal cave in the side of a mountain. This was where she was supposed to live, where she was supposed to survive a Wyoming winter? Martha felt something break inside her, not violently, but quietly, like ice cracking under weight it was never meant to bear. This was her life now, a cave on a mountain with a man who was practically a stranger. No going back, no other options, just survival. "Come on," Ethan said, and started toward the dark opening. Martha followed because there was nothing else to do. The cave mouth was tall enough to walk through without ducking, and wider than it had appeared from the ledge. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the wind died, the howling reduced to a distant echo. Ethan struck a match, and Martha got her first glimpse of her new home. It wasn't a cave. Oh, it started as one. Natural stone walls curved upward into darkness. But someone had worked this space, shaped it, made it deliberately human. The walls near the entrance were reinforced with timber. The floor was smooth and level, covered in part with rough-hewn planks. As Ethan lit a lantern hanging near the entrance, warm light spilled across a space that was impossible. The main chamber was enormous, at least 40 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows. But what made Martha's breath catch wasn't the size. It was the order. Everything had a place. Tools hung on the walls in neat rows. Firewood was stacked with geometric precision. Shelves held supplies, organized by type and size. The far end of the chamber held what looked like living quarters. A bed, a table, chairs, all handmade but showing a craftsman's care. And beyond that, barely visible in the lamplight, was another opening, not leading outside but deeper into the mountain. "How long have you lived here?" Martha asked, her voice echoing strangely in the space. 5 years, 6, come spring. And you built all of this? Some was already here. I just improved it. It's incredible. Ethan looked at her sharply, as if suspecting mockery. When he found none, something in his expression softened. It's dry. It's safe. It'll keep you alive through winter. That's all that matters. He moved to the fireplace, an actual fireplace, built into the natural stone with a chimney that must have been carved through the mountain, and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, flames were crackling, and blessed warmth began to seep into the space. Martha stood near the entrance, dripping melted snow onto the floor, unsure what to do with herself. This was her wedding night, technically, though they'd never said vows. This was her home now, though it felt more alien than the moon. This man was her husband, though she didn't even know his favorite color. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Ethan said, not looking at her. "There's dry things in the trunk by the bed. They'll be too big, but better than freezing." Where should I? He gestured to a curtained area near the living quarters. "There's privacy there. Take your time. I need to check on Goliath, make sure she's settled for the night. I'll be gone a while." Before Martha could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the snow with the same silent efficiency he did everything. Alone, Martha finally let herself shake. Her entire body trembled, from cold, from exhaustion, from the sheer overwhelming impossibility of everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. She'd stepped off a train a lifetime ago. The woman who'd stood on that platform was already a stranger. She forced herself to move, to cross the cave to the curtained area. Behind it was a small alcove with a washstand, a mirror, and the promised trunk. Martha caught sight of herself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the reflection. Her face was wind-burned and red, her hair a disaster of tangles and melted snow, her eyes hollowed out by exhaustion. But she was alive. Against all odds, despite everything the world had thrown at her, she was still alive. Martha stripped off her wet clothes with fingers that barely worked, letting them fall to the floor in a sodden heap. The dry clothes in the trunk were men's clothes. Wool shirts, canvas pants, all far too large. But Ethan had been right. Too big was better than wet. She dressed quickly, rolling up sleeves and cuffs, cinching the pants with a length of rope she found in the trunk. When she emerged from behind the curtain, Ethan was back, melting snow in a pot over the fire. He glanced up, took in her appearance, and nodded once. "Better," he said. "Warmer?" "Yes, thank you." He ladled the now hot water into 2 tin cups and held one out to her. Martha took it gratefully, wrapping her frozen hands around the warmth. They stood in silence, drinking the hot water, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the storm howled and raged, but inside the mountain there was only warmth and quiet, and the strange, fragile peace of having survived. "Thank you," Martha said again, softly, "for not leaving me. On the trail, when you saw me, you could have turned back, left me in town, but you didn't." Ethan stared into his cup. "Made a promise. I keep my promises." "Still, thank you." He nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "You should sleep. Tomorrow we'll talk about arrangements. Figure out how this works. Where will you sleep?" "Here. By the fire." "That's not... We're supposed to be married. People will expect... People aren't here." His voice was firm but not unkind. "And I'm not going to touch you until you're ready to be touched. Could be a week, could be a year, could be never. That's your choice to make, not mine." Martha stared at him, this impossible man who kept defying everything she thought she knew about the world. "Why?" she whispered. "Why what? Why are you being kind to me?" Ethan looked up then, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since they'd met. "Because you deserve kindness, Miss Calloway. And because this world is cruel enough without me adding to it." He turned back to the fire, ending the conversation as abruptly as he'd started it. Martha carried her cup to the bed, their bed, though apparently not yet, and sat on the edge. The mattress was stuffed with something soft, probably dried grass or moss. The blankets were thick wool, hand-woven, worn soft with use. Everything in this place spoke of solitude, of a life lived alone but not carelessly. She lay down, pulling the blankets up to her chin, and stared at the cave ceiling dancing with firelight. Her body ached in 1,000 places. Her mind spun with exhaustion and confusion and something that might have been hope but felt too fragile to name. Across the chamber, Ethan settled by the fire, his back against the stone wall, his long legs stretched toward the warmth. He looked like he belonged there, part of the mountain, carved from the same stone, just as permanent and just as unmovable. Martha closed her eyes and listened to the storm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new impossibilities to overcome. But tonight, she was warm. She was dry. She was alive. And somewhere in the darkness, a strange man who'd promised survival kept watch while she slept. Martha woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of methodical chopping. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The ceiling above her was stone, not plaster. The air was cold, but not bitter, warmed by a fire she could hear crackling somewhere nearby. And the bed beneath her was harder than anything she'd slept on in years. Yet somehow she'd rested better than she had in months. Then memory flooded back. The train, the town, the climb. Ethan. She sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. Muscles she didn't know she had screamed in agony. Her hands were covered in cuts and bruises from the climb, each one throbbing with its own particular rhythm of pain. But she was alive and warm, and that seemed like miracle enough. Beyond the curtain that separated the sleeping area from the main chamber, she could hear Ethan moving around with quiet efficiency. Martha pushed herself out of bed, her legs wobbling like a newborn calf's, and pulled back the curtain. He stood at the table cutting vegetables with precise, economical movements. He'd changed clothes, wore clean canvas pants and a wool shirt that had seen better days but was meticulously mended. His hair was tied back with a leather cord, revealing the sharp angles of his face in the morning light that filtered through cracks in the rock. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Coffee's on the fire. Cups on the shelf." Martha crossed the chamber on unsteady legs, acutely aware of how she must look in his oversized clothes, her hair a rat's nest, her face probably still showing the ravages of yesterday's ordeal. She found a cup and poured coffee from the pot hanging over the fire. The liquid was black as sin and strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot and it was real, and she drank it gratefully. "How do you feel?" Ethan asked, still focused on his chopping. "Like I was run over by a train and then dragged up a mountain." "That's about what happened. Sit. Breakfast will be ready soon." Martha sank into one of the chairs at the table, cradling her coffee. In the better light of morning, she could see the cave more clearly. What had seemed rough and primitive last night revealed itself as something more deliberate. The furniture was handmade but showed real craftsmanship. Joints fitted perfectly, surfaces sanded smooth, everything built to last. The tools on the walls were organized with almost military precision. Even the firewood was stacked in a pattern that suggested both efficiency and an eye for order. "You built all of this?" she asked. "Most of it. Some I traded for in town." "You go to town often?" "Once a month in good weather, less in winter." He scraped the vegetables into a pan already sizzling over the fire. "Eggs? You have eggs? Up here?" "Chickens in the back chamber, 6 of them. They don't lay much in winter, but enough." "You have chickens?" "In a cave. On a mountain. Gets cold, but they manage. Everything manages if you give it what it needs." He cracked 4 eggs into the pan with one hand, a move so practiced it was almost beautiful. "Salt?" "Please." They ate in silence, Martha too hungry and too overwhelmed to make conversation. The eggs were fresh, the vegetables crisp despite being stored for winter, and the bread, when had he made bread, was dense and filling. It was simple food, frontier food, but it was good and there was enough of it, and that was more than she'd had in weeks. When they finished, Ethan collected the plates and carried them to the washstand. "I need to show you the mountain," he said, "where things are. What's safe, What's not? The storm passed, but another's coming tonight. You need to learn the layout before visibility drops again. I can barely walk. I know, but you need to learn anyway. If something happens to me, you need to be able to survive on your own. The casual way he said it sent a chill through Martha that had nothing to do with the temperature. What could happen to you? Anything. Injury, illness, fall, animals. The mountain doesn't care about intention. It'll kill you just as quick whether you're careful or careless. He pulled on a heavy coat made of layered furs. Come on, I'll go slow. Martha forced herself to stand, every muscle protesting. Ethan handed her a coat, another one of his, massive on her frame, but lined with rabbit fur that was immediately warm. He helped her into boots that were too large, stuffing the toes with wool so they'd fit better. You'll need your own things made, he observed. Can't keep wearing mine. You know how to sew? Of course. Good. I've got hides that need working. You can make what you need. They stepped out onto the ledge, and Martha got her first real look at where she'd climbed in the dark. The world had transformed overnight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of impossible beauty. Snow covered everything in a blanket of white so pure it hurt to look at. The sky was a blue so deep it seemed solid, and the sun, when had she last seen the sun, blazed with cold fire. Below them, the valley stretched out for miles, a patchwork of white and dark, where wind had scoured the snow away from stone. And beyond that, more mountains, an endless sea of peaks marching toward a horizon that seemed impossibly far away. It's beautiful, Martha breathed. It's deadly, Ethan corrected. Never forget that. This place will kill you if you make a mistake. He pointed down the path they'd climbed. That's the only way up or down unless you can fly. Ice makes it impassable sometimes for days. You get caught down below when that happens. You're stuck until it melts. And if you're caught up here, you wait. Everything you need is here. Food, water, shelter. Long as you don't panic, you survive. He led her along the ledge, moving with the confidence of someone who'd walked this path 1,000 times. Martha followed more carefully, acutely aware of the drop on one side and the sheer rock wall on the other. The ledge curved around the mountain, widening in some places, narrowing to barely 2 feet in others. After about 50 yards, the ledge opened onto a broader shelf of rock, perhaps 20 feet across. Here, Ethan had built a crude structure, more of a windbreak than a building, but functional. Inside were supplies, barrels of grain, crates of dried goods, tools, and equipment. Emergency stores, he explained. Fire can't reach them out here. If something happens to the main chamber, this keeps us alive. How long could we survive on what's here? 3 months if we're careful, less if we're not. They continued around the mountain. Ethan showed her where to find water, a spring that emerged from the rock and had been channeled into a stone basin, covered with boards to keep it from freezing solid. He showed her the chicken coop, built into a sheltered alcove and insulated with straw and moss. He showed her the root cellar, dug deep into the mountain where the temperature stayed just above freezing year-round. Each location came with detailed instructions: how to collect water without contaminating the source, how to feed the chickens and collect eggs, how to rotate the root vegetables so nothing spoiled. Ethan delivered the information with the same serious intensity he brought to everything, as if her life depended on remembering every detail. It probably did. You've thought of everything, Martha said as they paused to rest. Her legs were shaking from exertion, and she was breathing hard in the thin mountain air. Had to. Made mistakes when I first came up here. Learned from them. He looked out across the valley. Lost my first winter's supplies to mice. Didn't secure things properly. Nearly starved. You make that mistake once, you don't make it twice. Is that when they started calling you cursed? When you came up here? No, that started before. He was quiet for a moment, then continued. I used to live in town. Had a house, a workshop. I was a builder. Made furniture, cabinets, fancy things for people who could afford them. Was good at it, too. People came from 3 towns over for my work. What happened? My wife happened, Lillian. We married young. I was 19, she was 17. Everyone said it was a good match. Her father owned the lumber mill. I needed lumber. Made sense to everyone. He picked up a handful of snow and let it sift through his fingers. She hated me. Not at first, maybe, but eventually. Hated that I worked all the time. Hated that I didn't talk much. Hated that I was happy in the workshop and miserable at social gatherings. She wanted a different life than the one I could give her. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was right to hate me. I was a terrible husband. Didn't know how to be anything else. He let the last of the snow fall. She got pregnant. Thought maybe that would fix things. It didn't. She went into labor early, and I was in the workshop. Didn't hear her calling. By the time I found her, it was too late. Baby was breech, stuck. She bled out before I could get the doctor. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. Ethan. Buried them both on a Tuesday. Whole town came to the funeral, but they were already whispering. Cursed, they said. Death follows him, and they weren't wrong, were they? Everyone I'd ever cared about was dead. That's not your fault. You can't blame yourself for, I don't blame myself. Not anymore. He stood, brushing snow from his pants. I'm just telling you what happened. Why people say what they say. Why I came up here. To get away from the whispers? To get away from caring. Easier to survive alone. No one to fail. No one to lose. But you married again. You said you had a second wife. Something dark crossed his face. That was a mistake. He started walking again, and the set of his shoulders told Martha the conversation was over. They made their way back to the main cave in silence, Ethan moving with his usual efficiency while Martha struggled to keep up, her thoughts churning. This man was broken. She could see it now, the cracks carefully hidden beneath competence and control. He'd built this fortress in the sky not to survive, but to hide, to cut himself off from a world that had taken everything he loved and blamed him for the taking. And she'd married him, tied her fate to his, climbed into his isolation, and made it her own. Back inside the cave, Ethan immediately set to work on some project. He seemed incapable of stillness, always moving, always doing. Martha sank into a chair, her legs grateful for the rest. You should work on making yourself clothes, Ethan said, not looking up from whatever he was building. Can't keep wearing mine. There's a sewing kit in the trunk, and hides in the storage room. Take what you need. I don't know how to work with hides. I'll show you. It's not complicated. Just takes time. He abandoned his project and led her to another chamber. She was beginning to realize the cave system was far more extensive than she'd first thought. This room was cooler, drier, and filled with hides in various stages of preparation. Some were still raw, others had been scraped and stretched, and some were already tanned and ready for use. Ethan selected a few and carried them back to the main chamber. Then, with the same patient precision he brought to everything, he showed her how to cut, how to sew, how to make the stitches small and tight so they wouldn't tear under stress. You're a good teacher, Martha observed, watching his hands move through the demonstration. Had to learn to be. No one else up here to teach me anything. They worked in companionable silence, Martha slowly gaining confidence with the unfamiliar materials. Her hands, still sore from yesterday's climb, protested the work, but she pushed through. This was survival. This was what she needed to do. As the afternoon wore on, conversation began to flow more naturally. Small things at first, Ethan asking about her sewing skills, Martha asking about the best way to cut leather. Then larger things. Martha told him about Philadelphia, about her father's failed business, about the slow slide from comfort to poverty. Ethan told her about learning his trade, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from raw wood. They didn't talk about the big things. Not yet. Not about expectations or fears or what came next. But the small talk was enough. It was connection, however fragile, however tentative. As evening approached, Ethan began preparing dinner. More vegetables, some dried meat rehydrated in broth, the last of the bread from breakfast. Martha set aside her sewing and watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way he wasted nothing, planned everything. Can I help? She asked. Can you cook? I can learn. He almost smiled at that, just a tiny quirk at the corner of his mouth, gone as quickly as it appeared. Tomorrow. Tonight. Rest. Your body needs time to recover. They ate as the light faded from the cave entrance, the world outside going dark and cold, while inside the fire kept them warm. And for the first time since arriving, Martha felt something that wasn't quite fear or resignation. something that might, eventually, become contentment. But that night, as she lay in bed listening to Ethan settle by the fire, a new sound cut through the darkness. A howl, long, mournful, and far too close. Martha sat up, her heart hammering. What was that? Ethan's voice came calm from the darkness. Wolves. There's a pack that ranges through here. Are we safe? They can't get in, and they're more afraid of us than we are of them. Another howl answered the first, then another, until it seemed like the entire mountain was singing a song of hunger and cold. Try to sleep, Ethan said. They'll move on by morning. But Martha lay awake for hours, listening to the wolves, thinking about survival and isolation and the strange, serious man who'd brought her to this impossible place. And somewhere in those dark hours, a question formed that she couldn't quite answer. Was she being saved, or had she simply traded one prison for another? The next day dawned clear and brutal. The temperature had dropped overnight, and when Martha woke, her breath clouded the air even inside the cave. Ethan was already up, building up the fire to combat the cold. Storm's coming sooner than I thought, he said by way of greeting. Can you feel it? Martha stepped out of the sleeping area, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Feel what? The pressure. The air tastes different before a big storm. We've got maybe 6 hours before it hits. What do we need to do? Secure everything. Bring in extra wood, fill the water barrels, make sure the chickens have enough feed to last 3 days. 3 days? At least, maybe longer. This one's going to be bad. They worked through the morning with focused intensity. Ethan showed Martha how to properly stack firewood so it would dry and burn efficiently, how to fill water barrels without contaminating the source, how to move through the cave system safely in low light, using touch and memory instead of sight. And Martha discovered something about herself. She was capable. Her body, the one she'd been taught to hate and hide, was strong. It could carry heavy loads. It could endure cold and pain and exhaustion. It could keep going when her mind wanted to quit. You're doing good, Ethan said as they stacked the last of the firewood. Better than I expected. Were your expectations that low? Didn't have expectations, just observations. And I observe that you're stronger than you think you are. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't a feeling, it's a choice. You chose to keep climbing yesterday when you could have given up. You chose to work today when you could have stayed in bed. That's strength. Martha looked at him, this strange philosopher who hid in a mountain. Where did you learn to think like that? The hard way, same as everyone. By midday, the storm arrived. It came not gradually, but all at once, as if someone had pulled a curtain across the world. One moment there was visibility, the next there was nothing but white fury. The wind screamed across the mountain with such force that Martha could feel it through the stone. They retreated deep into the cave, into the living quarters, where the fire and the insulating rock kept the worst of the cold at bay. Ethan prepared a large pot of stew, throwing in vegetables, dried meat, herbs Martha didn't recognize, and set it to simmer over the fire. We'll eat from this for the next few days, he explained. Easier than cooking each meal, and it keeps the fire consistent. You've done this before. Every winter, sometimes multiple times, the mountain decides when you eat hot food and when you don't. Better to be ready. They settled in to wait out the storm, and for the first time there was nothing to do but exist in each other's presence. No tasks to complete, no lessons to learn, just two people trapped in a cave while the world outside tried to kill them. At first, the silence was comfortable. Ethan worked on some kind of carving. Martha couldn't tell what it would be yet, while she continued sewing her new clothes. But as the hours stretched on, the quiet grew heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Martha couldn't stand it anymore. Tell me about the second wife, the one who disappeared. Ethan's hand stilled on the carving. Why? Because I married you. Because I should know. He set the carving aside and stared into the fire. Her name was Rebecca. I met her 2 years after Lillian died. She was new to town, working at the boarding house. Needed money, I needed a wife. Seemed practical. Did you love her? No, she didn't love me either. We were honest about that much, at least. It was an arrangement, not a romance. What happened? I brought her up here. Thought maybe she could handle the isolation. She couldn't. Lasted 3 months, then one morning I woke up and she was gone. Took food, supplies, my best horse. Never saw her again. She just left? In winter? Spring, actually. Snow was melting, trails were passable. She timed it well. He poked at the fire with a stick. Found out later she made it to the next town over. Married a shopkeeper within a month. Had the marriage to me annulled, claimed I'd abandoned her. But that's not true. True enough. I brought her to a place she hated and expected her to be grateful for the privilege. That's a kind of abandonment. He looked at Martha directly. I'm telling you this so you know what you're getting into. This place, this life, it's not for everyone. If you need to leave, if you can't handle it, tell me. I'll take you back to town. No judgment, no anger, just honesty. Martha met his gaze and saw no trap there, no manipulation, just a tired man offering an escape route if she needed one. And maybe a week ago, a day ago, even an hour ago, she would have taken it, would have seen this as her chance to get back to civilization, to find some other solution to her predicament. But something had changed. Maybe it was climbing that mountain in a blizzard. Maybe it was learning that her body could do things she'd never thought possible. Maybe it was simply that Ethan Crow, for all his brokenness and isolation, had shown her more basic human decency in 2 days than most people had in years. I'm not leaving, she said. You don't have to decide now. Think about it. When the storm passes, I'm not leaving, she repeated, firmer this time. This isn't ideal, and I'm terrified half the time, and I have no idea if I can actually survive a winter up here. But I'm not running. I've been running my whole life, from expectations, from judgment, from my own reflection. I'm done running. Ethan studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Not quite approval, but maybe respect. All right then. We make this work. How? Honestly. No pretending this is something it's not. We're two broken people trying to survive in a place that doesn't care about feelings or fairness. We help each other, we're honest with each other, and we don't make promises we can't keep. That's not very romantic. Romance is a luxury. Survival is a necessity. We focus on necessity first. Martha found herself almost laughing. You are the most practical man I've ever met. Only way I know how to be. The storm raged for 3 days, just as Ethan had predicted. For 3 days, they existed in their small bubble of firelight and shared space, learning each other's rhythms, establishing routines. Martha discovered that Ethan woke before dawn, regardless of whether there was light or not, that he was left-handed, that he hummed tunelessly while he worked. Ethan discovered that Martha talked more when she was nervous, that she had a sharp memory for details, that she could make him laugh with her dry observations about their absurd situation. And slowly, carefully, they began to build something that wasn't quite friendship, but wasn't quite distance either. A partnership forged in necessity, but tempered with cautious kindness. On the third night, as the storm finally began to ease, Martha woke to find Ethan standing at the cave entrance, looking out at the clearing sky. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cold. Can't sleep? She asked. Never sleep well during storms. Too many variables, too many things that could go wrong. They stood in silence, watching the clouds break apart to reveal stars so bright and numerous it seemed impossible. The moon was rising, nearly full, painting the snow-covered world in shades of silver and blue. It's beautiful, Martha whispered. Yes, Ethan agreed. It is. Do you ever regret it? Coming up here? Cutting yourself off from everything? He was quiet for a long time. Sometimes. But then I remember what it was like down there, the whispers, the pitying looks, the constant weight of other people's expectations and judgments. Up here, the mountain doesn't judge. It doesn't whisper. It just is. And that's enough for you? It was. Before. And now? He turned to look at her, his face half in shadow, half in moonlight. Now I don't know. Ask me again in spring. Martha understood. Trust took time. Change took time. Whatever was forming between them, partnership, friendship, maybe eventually something more, it would unfold at its own pace. Rushing would only break it. Fair enough, she said. They stood together watching the stars until the cold drove them back inside, back to the fire, back to their separate corners of the cave. But something had shifted. The distance between them felt a little smaller. the silence a little less heavy. And Martha fell asleep that night thinking not about what she'd lost, but about what she might, impossibly, be building. The morning after the storm broke dawned so cold that ice had formed on the inside of the cave entrance. Martha woke to find Ethan already chipping it away with methodical precision, creating a passage to the outside world they'd been cut off from for 3 days. "How bad is it?" she asked, pulling a blanket around her shoulders as she approached. "Bad enough. Snow's over 4 feet in the drifts. The path down is going to be impassable for at least a week, maybe 2. He didn't look at her as he worked, just kept chipping. "We're committed now. No going anywhere until spring unless you want to die trying." The finality of it should have terrified her, should have sent her spiraling into panic at the thought of months trapped on this mountain with a virtual stranger. Instead, Martha felt an odd sense of relief. The choice was made. No more wondering if she should leave, could leave, would leave. She was here, and here she would stay. "Then I'd better learn how to survive," she said. Ethan paused in his work, turning to look at her with something that might have been approval in his pale eyes. "Yeah, you better had." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was part survival training, part cautious partnership. Ethan taught her everything: how to read the weather and the color of the sky, how to preserve food so it would last through the endless winter, how to move through deep snow without exhausting herself. He was a patient teacher, never mocking her failures, never rushing her progress. When she struggled, he simply showed her again. When she succeeded, he gave a brief nod and moved on to the next lesson. But it was in the evenings, when the work was done and they sat by the fire, that Martha began to see past the walls Ethan had built around himself. He would talk sometimes in short bursts about his life before the mountain, about learning his trade from his father, who'd been a carpenter of uncommon skill, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from raw materials, about the house he'd built with his own hands, the one he'd abandoned when he came to the mountain. "Do you miss it?" Martha asked one night as they shared the last of the day's stew. "Building things for other people?" Ethan stared into the fire, his face unreadable in the flickering light. "I miss the work, the feel of wood under my hands, the smell of fresh sawdust, the way a joint fits together perfectly when you've measured it right. But I don't miss the rest of it. The haggling over price, the clients who wanted something cheap but looked expensive, the social obligations that came with every transaction. You really don't like people much, do you?" "It's not that I don't like them. I just don't understand them. Never have. People say one thing and mean another. They make promises they don't keep. They smile while they're thinking cruel things." He glanced at her. "You're different, though." "How so?" "You say what you mean. When you're afraid, you don't pretend you're not. When you're angry, you show it. When you don't understand something, you ask. It's—" He searched for the word restful. "Being around you is restful." Martha felt something warm bloom in her chest, something dangerous and hopeful that she tried to push down. This wasn't romance, she reminded herself. This was survival, mutual dependence, nothing more. But her heart didn't seem to be listening. 2 weeks after the big storm, Martha woke to find Ethan standing at the cave entrance again, but this time his posture was different, tense, alert. "What's wrong?" she asked, joining him. "Listen." She listened. At first she heard nothing but the wind. Then, faintly, she caught it, a sound that didn't belong, a low rumble, getting louder. "What is that?" "Avalanche. Somewhere on the north face." Ethan's jaw was tight. Big one, by the sound of it. They stood listening as the rumble grew to a roar, then slowly faded. When silence returned, Ethan immediately began pulling on his heavy outdoor gear. "Where are you going?" Martha asked. "Need to check the path. Make sure it's still there." "I'm coming with you." "No, too dangerous. If there's been a slide, then you shouldn't go alone. If something happens to you out there, I need to know where to find you." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him war with himself, the instinct to protect battling with the logic of her argument. Logic won. "Stay close to me. Step only where I step. If I tell you to stop, you stop. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." They made their way out onto the ledge and around the mountain to where the path descended. The sight that greeted them made Martha's stomach drop. The avalanche had torn across the mountainside perhaps 100 yards from their position, a massive scar of churned snow and exposed rock, and while it hadn't touched their path directly, it had altered the terrain enough that what had been a difficult climb was now something approaching impossible. A section of the path had been buried under at least 10 feet of packed snow and debris. "Can we dig it out?" Martha asked. "Eventually, but not now. Snow needs to settle, stabilize. Try to dig now, we'll trigger another slide." Ethan studied the damage with professional assessment. "We're stuck here until spring, no question now." "How long is that?" 3 months. Maybe 4. 4 months. Alone on a mountain with a man she barely knew, cut off from all help or escape. Martha waited for the panic to come, for the fear to overwhelm her, but instead she felt only a strange calm. This was the situation. These were the facts. Panic wouldn't change them. "Then we better make sure we have enough supplies," she said. Ethan looked at her with something that might have been wonder. "You're not afraid." "I'm terrified. But fear doesn't help anything, does it?" "No," he agreed quietly. "It doesn't." They returned to the cave and spent the rest of the day taking inventory, calculating their resources against the extended timeline. They had enough food if they were careful, enough firewood if they supplemented with coal from the deposit Ethan had found deeper in the cave system. Enough of everything except patience and peace of mind. That night, Martha couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the wind, thinking about 4 months. 4 months of winter, 4 months of isolation, 4 months of living in close quarters with a man who was still largely a mystery to her. "Martha," Ethan's voice came soft from across the cave. "You awake?" "Yes." "Can't sleep either?" "No." A pause, then, "Want to see something?" She sat up, curious. "What?" "Come here, bring a blanket." Martha wrapped herself in wool and crossed the cave to where Ethan sat by the fire. He was holding a lantern and had his heavy coat on. "Where are we going?" "Deeper. I want to show you something I haven't shown anyone." He led her through the cave system, past the storage rooms and the chicken coop, into passages that grew narrower and more winding. The lantern light threw wild shadows on the stone walls, making it seem like they were walking through a living thing. Martha's heart hammered, but she followed, trusting him in a way that should have frightened her, but somehow didn't. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, the passage opened up into a chamber that stole Martha's breath. It was massive, at least 60 feet across, with a ceiling so high the lantern light couldn't reach it. But what made it extraordinary were the formations. Stalactites hung like frozen waterfalls, some as thick as tree trunks, others delicate as lace. Stalagmites rose from the floor to meet them, creating columns of stone that looked like they'd been carved by master craftsmen. And everywhere, coating every surface, were crystals that caught the lantern light and threw it back in 1,000 tiny rainbows. "Ethan," Martha breathed. "This is—" "I know." He raised the lantern higher, revealing more of the chamber. "Found it my first year here, was exploring the cave system, making sure I knew all the passages, and found this. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Yeah." But he wasn't looking at the crystals. He was looking at her, watching her face in the reflected light, and his expression was something Martha couldn't quite read. "Come on, there's more." He led her across the chamber to a far wall where water seeped from the rock and collected in a series of shallow pools. The water was crystal clear, and when Ethan held the lantern over them, Martha could see the pools were lined with more of the same crystals that covered the walls, making them glitter like they were filled with diamonds. "Is it safe to touch?" she asked. "I drink from it sometimes. Cleanest water on the mountain." Martha knelt and dipped her hand in. The water was cold, but not painfully so, and it felt impossibly pure against her skin. She cupped some and brought it to her lips. It tasted like nothing, no minerals, no earth, just water in its most essential form. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, looking up at Ethan. He set the lantern down and sat on a rock near the pools, his face half in shadow. "Because you deserve to see something beautiful. Because the last few weeks have been about survival and hardship, and I wanted you to know that this place isn't just a prison. It has moments of wonder." "It does," Martha agreed, settling beside him. "But I wasn't wrong before. You're not very comforting." "No? No. A comforting person would have told me everything would be fine, that spring would come soon, that the isolation wouldn't be so bad. Would you have believed me if I'd said those things? Not for a second. Then what would be the point? He picked up a small stone and tossed it into one of the pools, watching the ripples spread. I told you before, comfort's often a lie. But this is real. This beauty, this place that no one knows about but us, this is the truth of the mountain. It can kill you, yes, but it can also show you things that people who never leave their safe little houses will never see. Martha sat with that thought, watching the water settle. Is that why you stay? For moments like this? Partly. Also because I'm too stubborn to let the mountain win. Win what? The game of who gives up first. Martha laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the vast chamber. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Probably. But he was almost smiling, that tiny quirk at the corner of his mouth that she'd learned to recognize as his version of amusement. They sat in comfortable silence, the lantern light making everything look like a dream. And for the first time since arriving on the mountain, Martha felt something shift inside her. Not quite happiness. It was too soon for that, too fragile, but maybe the possibility of happiness. The sense that this strange, isolated life might hold moments worth living for. Ethan, she said quietly, thank you for bringing me here. For everything. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and in his pale eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Not love, not yet, but recognition, respect, the acknowledgement of an equal. You're welcome, Martha. The way he said her name, simple, direct, honest, sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the blanket. She looked away, suddenly flustered, and focused on the pools. We should probably head back, she said. It's late. Yeah, we should. But neither of them moved. They sat there in the crystal chamber, surrounded by impossible beauty, and let the moment stretch until finally Ethan stood and offered her his hand. Come on, morning comes early, even when you can't see the sun. They made their way back through the passages, but something had changed. The silence between them felt different now. Not awkward or heavy, but full of unspoken things that didn't need words yet. When they reached the main chamber, Ethan walked Martha to the curtained sleeping area, something he'd never done before. Sleep well, he said. You too. He hesitated, then, Martha, I'm glad you're here, in case I haven't said that. You haven't, but I'm glad too. She watched him walk back to his spot by the fire, and for the first time she wondered what it would be like to invite him to share the bed. Not for anything physical, just for the simple human comfort of not sleeping alone. But it was too soon for that. Too much could still go wrong. So she lay down alone and let herself remember the crystal chamber, the way the light had danced, the way Ethan had looked at her like she was something more than a burden, and she fell asleep with a smile on her face. The days after that were different. Softer somehow, even as the work remained hard. Ethan taught her to ice fish through a hole he'd cut in the frozen stream, standing close behind her to guide her hands, his breath warm on her neck. Martha learned to cook the meals he liked, experimenting with the limited supplies they had, finding ways to make the same ingredients taste new. They began to talk more freely, sharing stories from their pasts, learning each other's histories. Martha told him about her mother, who'd died when she was young, and her father who'd tried his best, but whose gambling had destroyed everything. About the society she'd moved through that smiled to her face and mocked behind her back. About the slow realization that no amount of money or breeding could overcome the simple fact that her body didn't match what the world expected. Ethan told her about his childhood, raised by a father who spoke more with his hands than his words, who taught carpentry through demonstration rather than instruction. About discovering he had a gift for building, for seeing how pieces fit together before they were joined. About the loneliness of being different, of not understanding the social games everyone else seemed to play effortlessly. We're both outsiders, Martha observed one evening as they sat by the fire. That's what we have in common. Yeah, though you had more choice in it than I did. Did I? I didn't choose this body, didn't choose to be born into a society that values appearance over everything else. No, but you chose to keep trying, to keep looking for a place that would accept you. I just gave up and hid. You didn't give up. You survived. Same thing sometimes. Martha shook her head. No, giving up is letting the world win. Survival is choosing to keep breathing even when it's hard. You chose survival, Ethan. Don't diminish that. He looked at her with that intense focus he sometimes got, like he was trying to see inside her thoughts. How did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of lying to myself. Maybe that's the same thing. 3 weeks into their extended isolation, the worst storm yet hit. It came without warning, a wall of white fury that made the previous storms look like gentle snow flurries. The wind screamed like something alive and angry, and the temperature dropped so fast that the cave itself seemed to contract around them. Ethan immediately went into crisis mode, checking seals, reinforcing windbreaks, making sure every passage was clear. Martha helped where she could, following his terse instructions, understanding without being told that this was different. This was dangerous. How long will this last? She asked when they'd done all they could do. Don't know. Could be hours. Could be days. He was checking their supplies, counting, calculating. We're fine for food and water. Firewood might get tight if this goes more than 2 days, but we have coal. We'll manage. You're worried. I'm cautious. There's a difference. But Martha could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept flicking to the cave entrance where the wind howled. Whatever this storm was, it had him concerned, and that scared her more than the storm itself. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped so much that ice was forming even in the main chamber, feet from the fire. Ethan built the fire higher than she'd ever seen it, feeding it constantly to keep the cold at bay. Come closer to the fire, he told Martha. We need to stay warm. She moved her chair nearer, but even this close she could feel the cold creeping in. Her fingers ached despite her gloves. Her face felt frozen despite the scarf wrapped around it. Ethan, she said through chattering teeth, I'm really cold. He looked at her, then at the fire, then back at her. Something shifted in his expression, a decision being made. Come here. What? Come here. We need to share body heat. It's the only way to stay warm enough. Martha hesitated, her mind full of propriety and social expectations that seemed absurd in the face of freezing to death. But Ethan was already moving, positioning himself against the wall closest to the fire, creating a space beside him. Martha, this isn't about anything except survival. Come here. She went, settling beside him, and immediately he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. The warmth of him was shocking, almost overwhelming after the cold. She could feel his heart beating steady against her back, feel the rise and fall of his breathing. Better? He asked, his voice rumbling through his chest. Yes, she managed. They sat like that for hours as the storm raged, Ethan occasionally reaching out to tend the fire but never letting go of her completely. And slowly, Martha stopped being aware of the impropriety and simply accepted the comfort. This was survival. This was two humans keeping each other alive in a world that wanted them dead. At some point, she must have fallen asleep because she woke to find herself lying on the floor, still wrapped in Ethan's arms, covered with every blanket they owned. The fire had burned low, and the cave was silent except for their breathing. Ethan, she whispered, I'm awake. Did the storm stop? About an hour ago, but it's still brutally cold. We should stay like this until morning, keep the warmth between us. Okay. She felt him adjust slightly, making sure she was comfortable, and the tenderness of the gesture made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. When was the last time someone had cared about her comfort? When was the last time someone had held her like she was something precious, rather than something to be tolerated? Ethan? Yeah? Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you turn me away? When you saw me at the station, when you realized I wasn't what you probably expected, why didn't you just leave me there? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I saw the look in your eyes. The same look I saw in the mirror for years. The look that says, I know I don't deserve kindness, but I'm hoping for it anyway. And I thought, maybe we deserve it, both of us. Maybe we've been told we don't for so long that we believed it, but maybe it's a lie. Martha's breath caught. Is it? A lie? I don't know yet. Ask me in the morning. But morning brought its own answer. Martha woke to find herself still in Ethan's arms, the fire burning bright because he'd somehow managed to feed it through the night without waking her. The cave was warmer now, the worst of the cold broken. She shifted and his arms loosened, letting her pull away. She sat up, looking down at him in the firelight. His eyes were open, had probably been open all night, watching to make sure she stayed warm and safe. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Someone needed to maintain the fire." "You should have woken me. We could have taken turns." "You needed the rest more than I did." Martha looked at this impossible man who gave without expecting anything in return, who protected without demanding gratitude, who saw her as something worth saving when the whole world had seen her as something to discard. And she made a choice. She leaned down and kissed him. It wasn't passionate or demanding, just a soft press of lips, a thank you written in touch instead of words. Ethan went absolutely still, like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with something that looked like wonder. "Martha, don't," she said softly. "Don't analyze it or question it. Just accept it. I wanted to kiss you, so I did." "Why?" "Because you kept me alive last night. Because you've kept me alive every night since I got here. Because you're the first person in my entire life who's looked at me like I'm enough exactly as I am." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek with impossible gentleness. "You're more than enough," he said roughly. You're everything I didn't know I needed." This time when they kissed, it was mutual, slow and sweet and full of all the things they hadn't said yet. And when they finally pulled apart, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer two strangers surviving together. They were something new, something being built one careful choice at a time. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world clean and white and new. Inside the cave, Martha and Ethan sat together in the firelight, and neither of them mentioned the fact that he'd finally moved from his spot by the fire to sit beside her on the bed, or that when they finally rose to face the day, they did it together, moving through their tasks with a new awareness of each other. The mountain had taken everything from both of them, but maybe, just maybe, it was giving something back. The days following that kiss moved differently, as if time itself had shifted into a new rhythm. Martha woke each morning not to isolation, but to partnership, not to fear, but to possibility. Ethan still kept his careful distance in some ways, never presuming, never pushing, but the wall between them had developed a door, and they were both learning when to open it. One morning, about a week after the terrible storm, Martha was working on her sewing when she noticed something odd. Ethan had disappeared into one of the deeper passages carrying tools and had been gone for over an hour. Curiosity finally got the better of her. She found him in a chamber she'd seen before but never paid much attention to. A smaller space off the main living area. He was working with intense concentration, measuring, marking, cutting wood with precise movements. "What are you making?" she asked. He looked up, and for a moment she saw something like embarrassment cross his features. "Come see." She approached and realized he was building furniture. Not crude survival pieces, but actual crafted furniture. A chair sat half-finished, its joints exposed, revealing the intricate joinery that would make it both beautiful and strong. Beside it were pieces for what looked like a small table and another chair. "Ethan, this is beautiful." "It's not done yet." He ran his hand along the chair's back. "I thought we could use a proper place to sit, to eat together. The stumps and crates aren't really suitable for what?" He met her eyes. "For a home. They're fine for survival. But I want this to be more than that. For you. For us." Martha felt her throat tighten. "You're building us a home." "Trying to. Don't know if I remember how anymore. Been a long time since I built anything except necessities." She moved closer, examining the chair. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, every joint perfect, every curve deliberate. This wasn't just functional, this was art. "You haven't forgotten," she said softly. "This is incredible. I found my old tools. Been keeping them wrapped, preserved, in the back chamber. Thought I'd never use them again. But then you came, and I started thinking about making things instead of just enduring things. Martha looked around the chamber and realized there were other pieces in various stages of completion. A bookshelf, though they had no books. A cabinet with delicate inlay work. A mirror frame carved with a pattern of leaves and vines. How long have you been working on all this? Since the second week you were here. Couldn't sleep most nights anyway, so I'd come back here and work. It helped me think. Think about what? He set down his tools and turned to face her fully. About whether I could do this. Be someone's husband again. Be someone's partner. Whether I could build something that lasted instead of watching everything I build fall apart. And what did you decide? That I wanted to try. That you deserved someone who was willing to try. He picked up a piece of wood, turned it over in his hands. I know I'm not easy to live with. I know I'm difficult and strange and too serious about everything. But I'm trying to be better, to make this place into something more than a hiding spot. Martha crossed the space between them and took the wood from his hands, setting it aside. Then she took those hands in hers, scarred, calloused, capable hands that created beauty from raw materials. You don't need to be better, Ethan. You just need to be you. The man who climbed through a blizzard with me. The man who taught me I was stronger than I thought. The man who's building us a home on the top of a mountain because he wants to, not because he has to. He pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, Martha. How to be close to someone without eventually driving them away. Maybe you just haven't found the right someone yet. Someone as stubborn as you are. Someone who won't run when things get hard. And you're that someone? I climbed a mountain in a blizzard, Ethan. I think we can safely say I don't run easily. He laughed then, a real laugh, rich and warm, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they pulled apart, he kept his arms around her, holding her like she was something precious. Help me finish the chairs, he asked. I don't know how to do woodwork. I'll teach you, same as everything else. They spent the rest of the day working together, Ethan showing her how to sand the wood smooth, how to apply oil to bring out the grain, how to test joints to make sure they were strong. Martha found she loved the work, the smell of fresh wood, the satisfaction of seeing something become more perfect with each careful stroke of the sandpaper, the way Ethan's eyes lit up when he talked about grain patterns and joint techniques. As evening approached, they carried the finished chairs into the main chamber and placed them at the table Ethan had completed earlier. The transformation was remarkable. What had been a survival camp now looked like a home, rustic but intentional, rough but cared for. We should christen them properly, Ethan said, with a real meal. We've been eating real meals for weeks. No, we've been eating survival rations. Tonight, we eat like people who have a home. He disappeared into the storage area and returned with supplies Martha hadn't known they had. A precious jar of honey, dried herbs she didn't recognize, a small sack of flour. He moved through the preparation with the same focus he brought to his woodwork, creating something that was part sustenance, part ceremony. They ate at their new table in their new chairs, and the meal was simple but felt like a feast. Fresh bread with honey, stew rich with herbs, even a small sweet made from preserved berries and the last of their sugar. This is wonderful, Martha said, savoring each bite. This is normal. Or what normal should be. People living together, making a life together, not just surviving, but actually living. Is this what you wanted, before everything went wrong? Ethan was quiet for a moment, thinking. I don't know what I wanted before. I just did what was expected, got married because it was time, built a business because I had the skills, lived in town because that's where people lived, never stopped to think about what I actually wanted. And now? Now I want this. I want to wake up and have someone to share coffee with. I want to build things because they're beautiful, not just because they're profitable. I want to live somewhere that makes sense to me, even if it makes no sense to anyone else. He reached across the table and took her hand. I want to be with someone who understands that. I do understand it, better than you might think. Tell me. So Martha told him about the life she'd left behind in more detail than she ever had before, about the suffocating expectations of Philadelphia society, where every word was measured, every action judged, every appearance scrutinized, about the slow realization that no matter how perfect her manners, how refined her education, how appropriate her behavior, her body would always be the first thing people saw and the only thing they remembered. I tried everything, she said, staring at their joined hands. Every new diet, every corset that promised to reshape me, every piece of advice on how to make myself smaller, less noticeable, more acceptable. And none of it worked because the problem wasn't my body. The problem was a world that couldn't see past it. Their loss, Ethan said simply. Maybe. But it hurt anyway. Watching my friends marry, watching them build lives while I was left behind. Knowing that every time someone looked at me, they were thinking, what a shame, or if only she would, or she'd be so pretty if. She looked up at him. You never did that. From the first moment you just saw me. Not my body as a problem to solve, just me as a person who needed to get somewhere safe. Because your body isn't a problem. It's just your body. Does what bodies are supposed to do? Gets you where you need to go, keeps you alive, lets you experience the world. Everything else is just noise from people who have nothing better to do than judge. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. People make it complicated because complicated lets them feel superior. But the truth is simple. You're alive. You're here. You're strong enough to survive on top of a mountain. That's all that matters. Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, relieving tears. How did you get so wise about this? Lived long enough being different to recognize it in others, and to recognize that different doesn't mean wrong. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, then worked together to clean up, moving around each other with an ease that spoke of growing familiarity. When the tasks were done, Ethan pulled out something Martha hadn't seen before, a worn book with leather binding. Can you read? He asked. Of course. Out loud? Why? Because I like your voice, and because I haven't heard a story in 5 years. So Martha read to him, curled up in one of their new chairs while Ethan sat in the other, whittling something small and delicate. The book was a collection of folk tales, probably left by some previous owner of the cave. The stories were familiar, heroes and monsters, quests and treasures, the usual fare. But reading them aloud in the firelight, with Ethan listening with complete attention, made them feel new again. When her voice grew tired, he took over, reading in his low, rough voice that turned even simple words into something meaningful. And when the fire burned low and the cold crept in, they moved together to the bed without discussion, without awkwardness, simply accepting that this was where they belonged now. Ethan held her close, and Martha felt safer than she had in her entire life. Not because the mountain had become less dangerous, but because she was no longer facing it alone. Days turned into weeks, and the mountain slowly revealed more of its secrets to Martha. Ethan took her deeper into the cave system, showing her passages that wound through the mountain like veins through stone. Some led to dead ends. Others opened into chambers filled with geological wonders, formations of crystal and stone that defied imagination. But it was one passage in particular that made Martha stop in her tracks. They had been exploring for about an hour, moving through increasingly narrow tunnels, when suddenly the passage opened up into something impossible. Light, actual daylight, filtered down from somewhere above, illuminating a chamber that made the crystal room look ordinary. The space was enormous, easily 100 feet across, and the ceiling soared upward into shadows. But what made Martha gasp was the garden. Yes, garden. Despite being inside a mountain, despite the Wyoming winter raging outside, there was life here. Moss covered the rocks in thick carpets of green. Small plants grew from cracks in the stone, fed by water that seeped from the walls. And in the center, where the light was strongest, actual flowers bloomed, small, delicate things that should not exist but did anyway. How is this possible? Martha breathed. Ethan pointed upward, and Martha followed his gesture. High above, perhaps 40 feet up, was a shaft that led to the outside world. It wasn't large, maybe 3 feet across, but it was enough to let in light and warmer air. There's a hot spring deeper down, Ethan explained. Keeps the temperature in here stable. And that shaft is positioned so it catches southern sun most of the day. Creates a microclimate. I've been cultivating it for 3 years. Martha walked forward slowly, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. In the dead of winter, on top of a frozen mountain, there was a garden. Small, strange, but undeniably alive. What are these flowers? Alpine varieties mostly. Found them growing wild on the mountain during summer, transplanted them here. Thought I was crazy, but some of them took. That one there is especially hardy. Blooms year-round as long as it has light and water. Martha knelt beside a cluster of tiny white flowers, marveling at their delicate beauty. You built this, created life in a place where there shouldn't be any. The mountain created it. I just helped it along. Don't diminish what you did. This is extraordinary. She turned to look at him, this man who claimed to be cursed, who'd been called a monster by people who couldn't see past their own prejudice. And she saw him clearly for the first time. Not a hermit hiding from the world, but a creator, an artist, someone who built beauty wherever he went because that was simply his nature. Ethan Crow, you are remarkable. He looked uncomfortable with the praise, as always. It's just plants. It's not just plants. It's hope. It's the belief that beautiful things can exist even in the hardest places. It's everything. She stood and crossed to him, and they kissed there among the impossible flowers, surrounded by life that should not exist but did anyway, because someone had been stubborn enough to make it so. There's more, Ethan said when they finally pulled apart. Something I haven't shown you yet. Something I haven't shown anyone. He led her to the far side of the garden chamber, where a narrow opening led into another passage. This one angled upward steeply, and they had to climb in places, pulling themselves up on handholds that Ethan had carved into the stone. Where are we going? Martha asked, her muscles burning from the exertion. You'll see, almost there. The passage finally leveled out and opened into a space that was less a chamber and more a tunnel. But at the far end, perhaps 30 feet away, Martha could see something that made her heart stop. Light. Not filtered light from a shaft, but full, brilliant daylight. They walked forward, and the tunnel opened onto a ledge that looked out over the most spectacular view Martha had ever seen. They were on the far side of the mountain, the side she'd never seen. Below them, the land fell away in a series of cliffs and valleys, and beyond that... Is that... Yes, Ethan said quietly. Another valley. Completely hidden from the townside. Takes a full day to climb down to it, but it's there. Martha stared in wonder. The hidden valley was enormous, miles across, sheltered on all sides by mountains. And even from this distance, she could see it was different from the barren landscape they'd traveled through. There were trees down there, evergreens that had somehow survived. There were clearings that might be meadows under the snow. There was a stream, visible as a dark ribbon cutting through the white. How long have you known about this? Since the beginning. It's why I chose this cave. I knew if I ever needed to, I could access that valley, build something down there. Why haven't you? Because I wasn't ready. Wasn't sure I wanted to commit to staying here permanently. This cave, it's temporary, a way station. But down there, he pointed to a specific area near the valley floor. Down there you could build something real, permanent, a home. Martha looked at where he was pointing and saw possibilities unfold like flowers. A real house built with Ethan's skill. Gardens that could grow in the protected valley. Livestock, maybe, if they could get animals down the mountain. Not just survival, but an actual life. We could do it, she said. When spring comes, we could start building. It would take years, years of work, carrying materials down, constructing piece by piece. And we'd still need to keep the cave for winter shelter until we built something substantial down there. But it's possible. Yes, it's possible. Martha turned to face him, her back to the incredible view. Is that what you want? To build something permanent down there? Ethan was quiet, and Martha could see him wrestling with the question, with all the implications it carried. Building down there meant commitment. It meant choosing to stay, choosing this life, choosing her. I want to build something that lasts, he finally said. I'm tired of temporary, tired of survival mode, tired of living like I'm just waiting for the next disaster. I want to create something, build something, make something that outlives me. And you want to do it with me? If you'll have me. I know I'm not... Martha cut him off with a kiss. Stop. Stop telling me all the things you're not. Tell me what you are. He cupped her face in his hands, looking at her with an intensity that made her breathless. I'm a man who wants to build you a house with windows that face south to catch the light, who wants to plant gardens with you and watch them grow, who wants to wake up every morning knowing you're there, knowing we're creating something together that matters. I'm a man who loves you, Martha Calloway, completely, terrifyingly, without reservation. Martha felt tears stream down her face, but they were tears of joy so pure it hurt. I love you too. I think I have since you held me during that first storm and made me believe I was strong enough to survive. They held each other on that ledge, looking out over their future, and made promises without words. When spring came, they would start building. They would create something extraordinary in that hidden valley. They would make a life that was theirs alone, free from judgment, free from cruelty, free from everything except the work of their own hands and the strength of their combined will. But first they had to survive the rest of the winter. The days that followed were both harder and easier than anything that had come before. Harder because the work was endless, maintaining the cave, caring for the chickens, keeping themselves fed and warm. Easier because they did it together, and together made even the hardest tasks bearable. Ethan began teaching Martha more advanced skills, how to work wood, joining her efforts to his in creating furniture for the home they were building inside the cave, how to preserve food so it would last not just through one winter, but through the next, how to read the mountain, understanding its moods and weather patterns. And Martha taught Ethan things too, though he seemed surprised she had anything to offer. She reorganized their storage systems, creating an inventory that made sense and saved time. She improved their meals, finding ways to make their limited ingredients more varied and appealing. She brought order to chaos in ways that made their daily life smoother, easier, more efficient. "You're good at this," Ethan observed one evening as they sat at their table reviewing her latest organizational schema. "At what?" "Making things work, seeing how pieces fit together. It's like carpentry, but with systems instead of wood. My father used to say I had a mind for business. He tried to teach me. Thought maybe I could help save his company. But women weren't allowed to own businesses in Philadelphia, and no one wanted to work with a woman anyway, especially not—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "Especially not what?" "You know what." "No, I don't. Say it," Martha sighed. "Especially not a fat woman. There. Happy?" "Martha." He waited until she looked at him. "You're not fat. You're substantial, solid, built for endurance and strength. And even if you were fat, so what? Fat doesn't mean incapable, doesn't mean stupid or lazy or any of the other things people try to attach to it. It just means you take up space in the world, and there's nothing wrong with that." "You really believe that?" "I really do. This world needs people who take up space, who don't apologize for existing, who are substantial enough to weather storms and strong enough to build futures. You're all of those things." Martha felt something break open inside her, some last defensive wall crumbling. She'd spent so many years believing the world's judgment of her, internalizing every cruel comment, every pitying look. But Ethan saw her differently, not despite her body, but as a whole person for whom her body was simply one aspect of who she was. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. Really seeing me. Not the version the world wants me to be, but who I actually am." "Always," he said simply. "I'll always see you." That night, they made love for the first time, and it was nothing like Martha had imagined. There was no shame, no hiding, no desperate need to extinguish the lights and pretend her body was something other than what it was. Ethan touched her like she was precious, like every curve and softness was exactly what he wanted. And Martha touched him back with equal reverence, learning the map of scars and calluses that told the story of his life. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the firelight, and Martha felt complete in a way she never had before. Not because a man had validated her, but because she had finally validated herself. She had climbed a mountain. She had survived a winter that would have killed most people. She had built a home from nothing and fallen in love with a man who was as broken and brilliant as she was. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm glad the train brought me here. That I'm glad I said yes to a man I'd never met. That I'm glad for every hard thing that happened because it led me to this moment." "No regrets?" "None. You?" "Not a single one." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and in the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The final weeks of winter passed in a blur of preparation and planning. Ethan began sketching designs for the house they would build in the valley. Not rough plans, but detailed architectural drawings that showed every joint, every beam, every window. Martha worked beside him, adding her own ideas, suggesting modifications that would make the space more functional. We need a proper kitchen, she insisted, with a real stove and counter space for preparation. We'll have to carry the stove down in pieces and reassemble it. Then that's what we'll do. And you'll want a pantry, separate from the main storage. Yes, and shelves for preserves, and a root cellar that's accessible from inside. Ethan added it all to the plans, his pencil moving with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. And Martha watched him work, marveling at the transformation. The broken, isolated man she'd met was gone, replaced by someone who was actively building a future instead of hiding from the past. One morning, she woke to find him standing at the cave entrance, staring out at the brightening sky. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around both of them. "What is it?" she asked. "The sun's rising earlier. Days are getting longer. Spring's coming." Martha felt excitement and fear in equal measure. Spring meant they could start building their dream, but it also meant the path down would clear, and they would have to face the world again. The town, the judgment, the reality that their mountain sanctuary wouldn't protect them forever. "Are you worried?" she asked. "About what?" "Going back to town. Facing people again." Ethan pulled her closer. "Let them talk. Let them whisper and judge and say whatever they want. None of it matters. We know what we've built here. We know what we're capable of. Their opinions can't change that." "I wish I had your confidence." "You do. You just don't recognize it yet. But you will. When we walk into that town together, when they see what we've survived and what we're building, you'll know your own strength, and nothing they say will touch you." Martha leaned against him, letting his certainty fill the spaces where her doubt lived. He was right. She had survived impossible things. She had climbed when climbing seemed impossible. She had built when building seemed futile. She had loved when love seemed like a luxury she didn't deserve. She was strong. She was capable. She was enough. And when spring finally came, melting the snow and clearing the paths, she would prove it not just to the world, but to herself. Spring arrived not with gentle warmth, but with violence. The snow didn't melt so much as surrender, rushing down the mountain in torrents that carved new channels through rock and earth. Martha stood at the cave entrance, watching the transformation, awed by the raw power of water reclaiming the landscape. "It's beautiful," she said as Ethan joined her. "It's dangerous. Won't be able to use the main path for another week at least. Too much runoff, too unstable." He studied the churning water below with the practiced eye of someone who understood the mountain's moods. But the alternate route should be passable in a few days. "There's an alternate route?" "Had to be. Can't rely on one path when you live somewhere this remote. I'll show you when it's safe." 3 days later, they made the descent together, taking the route that wound around the back of the mountain and came out nearly 2 miles from where the main path emerged. It was longer, more difficult, but safer in spring when the snow melt turned everything into a rushing hazard. When they finally reached level ground, Martha had to stop and simply breathe. Flat earth. Solid ground that didn't require careful foot placement and constant vigilance. She'd forgotten what it felt like to walk without fear of falling. "You all right?" Ethan asked. "Yes, just adjusting. It's been so long since I've been down here." 4 months, longest winter I've spent up there. "Was it harder, with me there?" He turned to her, his pale eyes serious. "It was easier. Every single day was easier because you were there." They had loaded Goliath with supplies for trade, furs Ethan had trapped and prepared, carved items he'd made during the winter, and some of the crystals from the cave that he said the town jeweler would buy. Martha wore clothes she'd made herself from the hides, practical and warm, and she walked beside Ethan with her head high, ready to face whatever judgment waited. The town looked the same as she remembered, small, harsh, unwelcoming. But Martha was different now. She was no longer the desperate woman who'd stepped off the train with nothing but fear and fading hope. She was someone who'd survived a Wyoming winter on top of a mountain. Someone who'd learned she was made of stronger stuff than the world had ever acknowledged. As they rode down the main street, heads turned. Conversations stopped. The same faces that had watched her leave now watched her return, and their expressions ranged from shock to disgust to grudging respect. "That's her," someone whispered, not quietly enough. "The one who married Crow. Can't believe she survived up there. Look at her, Probably ate all their winter stores herself. The comment was meant to wound, but Martha found it bounced off something harder than it used to find. Let them talk. Let them whisper their petty cruelties. She knew what she'd survived. She knew what she was capable of. Ethan guided Goliath to the general store and dismounted, then helped Martha down. His hand lingered on her waist, a quiet statement of solidarity and possession that she appreciated. "We'll trade here first," he said, "then stop by the jeweler. Should have enough credit for what we need." The store owner, a pinched man named Hawthorne, looked up as they entered and his expression soured immediately. "Crow, didn't expect to see you until next month. Plans changed. Need to place a large order." "How large?" Ethan pulled out a list. Martha's list, actually, meticulously planned over the winter. Building supplies, tools, seeds for the Hidden Valley garden, provisions they couldn't make themselves. It was extensive and expensive. Hawthorne's eyebrows rose as he read. "This is 3 times your usual order. You planning to build something?" "Maybe." "You got the credit for this?" "I've got furs and carved goods, plus crystal for Steinberg. That should more than cover it." "Let me see what you brought." They spent the next hour negotiating, and Martha watched with interest as Ethan conducted business. He was sharp, knew the value of what he'd brought, and refused to be cheated. When Hawthorne tried to lowball the price on the furs, Ethan simply started packing them back up. "Fine, fine," Hawthorne said. "Your price. But you're robbing me blind." "I'm paying fair market value. You're just used to cheating trappers who don't know better." They settled accounts, and Martha noted with satisfaction that they had enough credit not just for this order, but for future ones as well. Ethan had been building wealth quietly, carefully, for years. As they left the store, supplies arranged for later pickup, a woman approached. She was beautiful in the way that society valued, small, delicate, perfectly proportioned. Martha recognized her from that first day as the one who'd laughed. "Ethan Crow," the woman said, her voice sugary sweet. "I heard you'd taken a wife. I had to see for myself." "Mrs. Patterson," Ethan said coolly. "This is my wife, Martha." Mrs. Patterson's eyes swept over Martha with undisguised disdain. "My, you are a substantial woman, aren't you? I suppose that's useful up on that mountain. Someone needs to be strong enough to haul firewood." Before Martha could respond, Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between the two women. "My wife is substantial in every way that matters. She's brilliant, capable, and stronger than anyone I've ever met, which is more than can be said for women who have nothing better to do than tear others down to feel important." Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red. "How dare you?" "I dare because it's true. Martha survived a winter that would have killed you in a week. She learned skills in 4 months that most people never master in a lifetime. She climbed mountains, worked with her hands, and never once complained or gave up. So yes, she's substantial, and I thank every star in the sky for it." Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. This moment didn't need tears. It needed the truth that Ethan was speaking. Mrs. Patterson stammered, unable to form a response, and finally swept away in a rustle of skirts and wounded pride. "You didn't have to do that," Martha said quietly. "Yes, I did. I'm done letting people like her spread poison unchallenged." He took her hand. "Come on. We have more stops to make." At the jeweler's shop, Mr. Steinberg greeted them warmly. He was an older man, Jewish, who'd fled persecution in Europe and found his way to this harsh corner of America. He understood what it meant to be an outsider. "Ethan, and this must be the wife I've heard about. Please, come in, come in." They entered the cluttered shop, and Ethan pulled out a cloth bundle containing the carefully selected crystals. Steinberg examined them with a practiced eye, holding them up to the light, testing their clarity. "Magnificent," he breathed. "Absolutely magnificent. Where do you find such specimens?" "The mountain provides." "Indeed it does." He named a price that made even Ethan blink. "These are museum quality, my friend. I have buyers in Denver, San Francisco, even New York who will pay extraordinary sums for natural crystals of this caliber." They concluded the deal, and as Steinberg counted out payment, he looked at Martha with kind eyes. "You've changed him, you know. In all the years I've known Ethan Crow, I've never seen him look at peace. But today, That's what I see. Peace. He changed me too, Martha said softly. We changed each other. That's how it should be. Marriage should be transformation, not diminishment. He pressed the money into Ethan's hand. Build something beautiful, whatever it is you're planning. How did you? I'm old, not blind. I see the dreams in your eyes. Both of you. Build it. This world needs more beautiful things. They left the shop richer than they'd entered, but the real wealth was in the validation. Not everyone in this town was cruel. Not everyone judged based on surface appearances. Their final stop was the land office, and here Martha felt her nerves return. What Ethan was about to do would commit them permanently, would announce to the world that they were here to stay. The land agent, a bureaucrat named Morrison, looked up from his paperwork with bored eyes. Help you? I want to file a claim, Ethan said. Homestead Act, 160 acres in the high valley north of here. Morrison's eyes sharpened. That valley's inaccessible. No one's ever successfully claimed it. I'm not no one. I've been living in the mountains for 5 years. I can access it. You'll need to prove improvement within 5 years. Build a dwelling, cultivate the land. I'm aware of the requirements. Morrison pulled out the necessary forms, and as Ethan filled them out, Martha realized what this meant. Under the Homestead Act, the land would be theirs, truly theirs, if they could prove they'd improved it. 160 acres of hidden valley, protected by mountains on all sides, where they could build whatever life they imagined. You'll need witnesses to your claim, Morrison said. 2 upstanding citizens who can attest to your character. Martha's heart sank. Who in this town would stand for Ethan Crow, the cursed hermit? I'll witness. The voice came from behind them. Mr. Steinberg stood in the doorway, having followed them from his shop. Ethan Crow is a man of integrity and skill. I'll gladly attest to his character. And I'll be the second witness. The new voice belonged to an older woman Martha didn't recognize. She was weathered and strong, dressed in practical clothing. Name's Sarah Chen. I run the boarding house. I've known Ethan since he first came to this territory. He's honest, hardworking, and deserves that land more than anyone. Morrison looked uncomfortable. Clearly, he'd hoped to deny the claim on technicality. But with 2 witnesses, he had no choice. He processed the paperwork, stamped it with official seals, and handed Ethan the claim certificate. Congratulations! You now have 5 years to prove up or lose the claim. Outside, Ethan thanked both witnesses profusely. No thanks needed, Sarah Chen said. This town's treated you poorly for too long. About time someone stood up for you. She looked at Martha. Both of you. I see how people whisper. Ignore them. They're small-minded fools who'll die without ever having lived. You two? You're building something real. That takes courage. After they left, Martha and Ethan stood in the street, holding their claim certificate, and the magnitude of what they'd just done hit them both. We own 160 acres, Martha said, wonder in her voice. We do. It's real now, legal, ours. So we build. So we build. They spent the rest of the day arranging for supplies to be delivered to the base of the mountain over the coming weeks. Then, as the sun began to set, they started the long journey back up. The climb was easier this time, familiar now. Martha's body knew the rhythm, understood the demands. She moved with confidence up paths that had terrified her months ago. When they reached the cave, the sunset was painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They stood together on the ledge, looking out over the land that was now legally theirs, and made plans. We start tomorrow, Ethan said. Begin scouting the descent route to the valley. Mark out where we want to build. How long will it take to build a house? 2 years, maybe 3, working alone, carrying everything down piece by piece. But we're not in a hurry. We have the cave for shelter. We can take our time, do it right. I want to help, really help, not just support work. I'm counting on it. I'll need your eyes, your organizational mind. Building is just carpentry at scale. You're good at seeing how systems fit together. I need that. They spent that evening refining their plans, sketching and discussing and dreaming. And for the first time in her life, Martha felt like she was building towards something rather than running from something. The difference was everything. The next morning, they began the descent to the hidden valley. It took most of the day, carefully navigating the steep path, but when they finally reached the valley floor, Martha understood why Ethan had been so certain about this place. It was paradise. Protected by mountains on all sides, the valley had its own microclimate. The snow had already melted here, revealing meadows of new grass and groves of evergreens. The stream they'd seen from above was actually a small river, clear and cold and teeming with fish. There were deer tracks everywhere, and signs of other game. This wasn't just survivable. This was abundant. "We'll build there," Ethan said, pointing to a rise near the center of the valley. High enough to avoid spring flooding, but central enough to access everything easily. Trees for lumber all around us, river for water, game for food. It's perfect. They spent the day exploring, marking trees for harvest, identifying the best stone for quarrying, planning their garden plots. And as the sun began to set, painting the valley in golden light, Martha realized she was home. Not the cave, not even the house they would build, but this valley, this place they'd chosen together, this land they would shape with their own hands. This was home. The weeks that followed were the hardest work Martha had ever done. They began harvesting timber, felling trees, and processing them into lumber. Ethan taught her how to use a two-person saw, how to strip bark, how to stack the wood so it would season properly. They quarried stone for the foundation, breaking rock free from the mountainside and hauling it to the building site. Every muscle in Martha's body screamed in protest. Her hands developed new calluses on top of old ones. She fell into bed each night too exhausted to even speak. But she'd never been happier. This was creation. This was building something that would last. And every board they cut, every stone they placed, every measurement they calculated brought their dream closer to reality. By midsummer, they had the foundation laid, a beautiful structure of carefully fitted stone that would support the house for generations. By fall, they had the frame up, massive timbers joined with the precision that was Ethan's signature. The house was taking shape, becoming real. They worked through the second winter, making smaller progress but never stopping. In the cave, Ethan continued crafting furniture, building piece by piece what would fill their home. Martha sewed curtains, wove rugs from scraps of fabric, planned every detail of their future domestic life. And through it all, they grew together. Not the desperate clinging of two broken people, but the steady intertwining of two people choosing each other every day. They argued sometimes about house design, about priorities, about 1,000 small decisions. But they always worked through it, always found compromise, always remembered that they were building this together. The second spring brought new challenges. Supplies ran low. Money grew tight. The sheer scope of what they were attempting sometimes seemed impossible. "Maybe we're being foolish," Martha said one evening as they sat reviewing their dwindling funds. "Maybe we should scale back, build something smaller." "No." Ethan's voice was firm. "We build it right or we don't build it at all. This house needs to last 100 years, needs to be something we're proud of. But if we run out of money, we won't. We'll trap more, sell more crystals, do whatever we need to do, but we don't compromise on this." Martha looked at the plans spread across their table, the house of their dreams, large enough for a family, beautiful enough to make visitors weep, strong enough to withstand anything the mountain could throw at it. "You're right," she said. "We don't compromise." They doubled their efforts. Ethan took on commission work in town, building custom furniture for the few wealthy families in the area. Martha started selling the preserves she'd made, her organizational skills turning limited ingredients into products people would pay premium prices for. They saved every penny, spent nothing on comfort or convenience, poured everything into the house. By the third spring, the house was nearly complete. The roof was on, keeping out the weather. The windows were in, real glass-paned windows that Ethan had ordered from Denver at ruinous expense, but which flooded the interior with light. The floors were laid, smooth planks of pine that glowed honey gold in the sun. Martha stood in what would be their kitchen, running her hand along the counter Ethan had built, and felt tears stream down her face. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing. Everything's right. It's so beautiful, Ethan. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." He came to her, pulling her into his arms. "We built this. Together. Every board. every nail, every joint. This is ours. I never thought I'd have this. A real home, a real life, someone who saw me as worth building for. You are worth building for, worth everything I could ever create. They made love there in their unfinished kitchen, surrounded by sawdust and the smell of fresh wood, and it was perfect and real and theirs. The final touches took another month. Furniture moved in, piece by piece, everything handcrafted by Ethan over the 3 years of building. Martha's curtains went up, her rugs were placed, her kitchen organized exactly as she'd planned. Gardens were planted, vegetables for eating, flowers for beauty, herbs for medicine. And finally, on a day in late spring when the valley was in full bloom, they stood together outside their completed home and simply looked. It was magnificent. 2 stories of timber and stone with a wraparound porch and dormers that caught the morning light. Smoke curled from the chimney. Martha had made bread that morning in their new kitchen. Chickens scratched in the yard. They'd carried the flock down from the cave. The garden was planted, already showing green shoots of promise. "Should we go in?" Martha asked. "Not yet. I want to look at it a moment longer. Want to remember this feeling, that we actually did it. We built this impossible thing." They stood hand in hand looking at their impossible house in their hidden valley, and Martha thought about the woman she'd been when she stepped off that train. Desperate. Ashamed. Convinced she was less than everyone else. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who'd climbed mountains and built houses and fallen in love with a man who saw past surfaces to souls. Someone who'd learned that strength came in infinite forms, and hers was the kind that endured, that persisted, that refused to be broken no matter what the world threw at it. "Martha?" Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "There's one more thing." He pulled something from his pocket, a small carved box. Inside was a ring, simple but perfect, carved from wood and inlaid with crystal. "I know we're already married, legally at least, but we never had a real wedding, never made promises to each other with intention. So I'm asking now, with this house as witness, with this land as proof of what we can build together. Martha Calloway Crowe, will you marry me? Will you choose this life, this valley, this impossible dream we're living?" Martha took the ring, slipped it onto her finger where it fit perfectly, because of course it did. Ethan measured everything with precision. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I choose this. I choose us. I choose building impossible things with you for the rest of my life." They kissed there in front of their house, sealing promises that didn't need words but got them anyway. And then, finally, they went inside. Carried over the threshold in the tradition Martha had never thought would apply to her, and began their life in the home they'd built. Years passed. The house weathered storms and seasons, growing more beautiful with age as the wood darkened and settled. They added to it a workshop for Ethan, a greenhouse for Martha, a barn for the livestock they eventually acquired. The garden expanded, producing more than they could use, and Martha started selling surplus in town, building a small business that gave them independence. Word spread about the hidden valley, about the house Ethan Crowe had built for his wife. Some called it foolish. Others called it cursed, waiting for disaster to strike. But a few, the ones who'd witnessed their claim, who'd seen them work, called it miraculous. A testament to what was possible when 2 people refused to accept the limitations the world tried to impose. Travelers sometimes found their way to the valley, following rumors of the impossible house. Ethan and Martha welcomed them, showed them what they'd built, shared meals and stories. Some visitors stayed a few days, helping with work in exchange for hospitality. Others became regular guests, returning season after season. The town's opinion shifted slowly. Respect replaced mockery, though there were always those who sneered. But their sneers meant nothing to Martha now. She'd learned the truth that had always existed, but which she'd needed the mountain to teach her. The judgment of small minds couldn't diminish what she'd built, couldn't touch what she and Ethan had created together. On their 5th anniversary of completing the house, they stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley gold and crimson. Martha's hand rested on her swollen belly, the child they'd thought impossible but who was due in 3 months. Ethan's arm was around her shoulders, solid and sure as the house itself. "Do you ever miss it?" Martha asked. "The solitude? The years before I arrived?" "Never. Not even for a second." Not even when I'm difficult? Especially not then. Your difficulty means you care, means you're engaged. I'll take difficult and present over easy and distant any day. Martha leaned into him, feeling their child move beneath her hand. We're going to be parents. Terrifying thought. We'll probably make mistakes. Definitely, but we'll make them together. And we'll teach this child what we learned, that strength comes in unexpected forms, that the world's judgment means nothing, that with enough stubbornness and work and love, you can build anything, even impossible houses on hidden mountains. Even families where everyone said there couldn't be one, especially those. As darkness fell and stars emerged in impossible numbers, they went inside their house, their home, their monument to stubborn hope. And somewhere far below, the town whispered about the curse that never came, about the hermit who built paradise, about the woman who climbed a mountain and refused to ever climb down. But Martha and Ethan didn't hear the whispers. They were too busy living the impossible life they'd built, too occupied with the work of raising children and expanding gardens and creating beauty in a place where everyone had said only hardship could exist. They'd proven the world wrong, and every day they woke in their house, every meal they shared at the table Ethan had built, every moment they spent building their life together was another testament to a simple truth. You are never too broken to build something beautiful, never too different to deserve happiness, never too much of anything except exactly what you need to be. Martha had stepped off a train with nothing but fear and fading hope. She'd climbed a mountain in a blizzard. She'd learned to survive in impossible conditions. She'd fallen in love with a man the world called cursed, and she'd built an empire above the clouds where judgment couldn't reach, where cruelty held no power, where two broken people had fused their fragments into something stronger than either could have been alone. The mountain had tested her. The winter had tried to break her. The world had told her she wasn't enough. But Martha Calloway Crowe had climbed anyway, had built anyway, had loved anyway. And that made all the difference.